Welcome back. We discussed, in particular, the Calvinists and the Catholics last time, and these ongoing discussions of the age of religious wars. In this discussion, I want to kind of do a survey of Eastern Europe. We've kind of neglected Eastern Europe, Eastern and Central Europe during this course, and I want to kind of do just a brief general survey to give you some sense of what's going on east of the Rhine. The Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Poland, and Russia were each much larger than any of the Western states that we've been talking about, the Netherlands, Great Britain, France, Spain. But within these large units, the most effective authority was generally held by the local magnates, the local noblemen. No East European prince, great or small, could match, say, Philip II of Spain or Elizabeth I in sovereign strength. No East European prince could expect several million reasonably cooperative subjects like those in Spain or in England to pay burdensome taxes, to obey complex instructions, to perform patriotic military service, or to participate intelligently in civil discourse and obligations. In Sweden, only Gustavus Adolphus could muster from his people the kind of strong community spirit which animated the Spanish, the English, the Dutch, and the French. So we're drawing contrasts between those peoples in Eastern Europe and the rulers and the style of government with those in the West that we spent most of our time with. Community spirit or national consciousness was hard to achieve in Central and Eastern Europe, for the populations there were ethnically diverse. Some 14 major languages were spoken, as against 5 in Western Europe. Ethnic rivalries cut across religious rivalries. By the close of the 17th century, the largest Eastern political units, the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Kingdom of Poland, were all in decline. New power centers, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, were rising. But in 1689, they were far inferior to France and England in their strength, their wealth, and their cultural vitality. In short, the religious wars accelerated the political disintegration of Central and Eastern Europe at the very time when the Atlantic states were consolidating their sovereign national power. So the West is rising, East and Central Europe appear to be declining. Let's look at Poland in particular. Poland played only a feeble international role, and in the 18th century, the Polish state completely disappeared. Poland will be partitioned 3 times in the late 18th century, and of course it would disappear again in the middle of the 20th century when the Russians and the Germans obliterate Poland at the beginning of World War II. Poland suffered from ethnic and religious problems, but by far the biggest problem was political disorganization. The Polish gentry were so suspicious of dynastic power that they almost always elected a foreigner to come in and act as king. Between 1548 and 1688, the winning candidates, outside candidates to rule Poland, were Lithuanian, French, Hungarian, and Swedish. Can you imagine? These kings lacked the royal lands, the budget, the army, or the bureaucracy that the Western monarchs enjoyed. The Polish serfs, the peasants, had less individual freedom than the Balkan peasantry under Turkish rule. Poland, like other East European states, was ethnically divided, a situation which compounded its political difficulties. Poles occupied the western part of the state, Lithuanians in the northeast, Russians in the east, Ruthenians in the south, and then Germans and Jews congregated in the Polish towns. Of all these peoples, only Poles and Lithuanians were admitted to the ruling landlord class. It became possible for French, Prussians, and other foreign powers, by bribing members of the Polish gentry, to veto Polish tax laws or to stymie Polish military preparations, a truly dysfunctional and corrupt state. To many observers, Poland's gentry democracy proved the folly of constitutional self-government and the necessity for absolute monarchy. To the Russians, to the Prussians, to the Austrians, Poland's governmental paralysis offered an excellent excuse for partitioning the state in the late 18th century. And again, you can look at a map of the three partitions of Poland which take place in the late 1700s. Now in Russia, just move east from Poland to Russia, remember that Russia has a unique history among the Europeans in that it suffered under the Mongol yoke. Hundreds of thousands of Russians carried off into slavery by the Mongols. Belief in the individual dignity of man, this is a fragile enough concept in the 16th century West European countries, completely alien to the Russians. Czars, nobles, priests, peasants, all accepted physical brutality as a natural part of life, flogging, torture. Russians believed that the old Rome had fallen into heresy under the popes, and that a new Rome, Constantinople, had become a pawn of the infidel Turks. Therefore, Moscow was the third and greatest capital of the Christian world. So think about this. Russia is the third Rome, right? The original Rome in Italy had disintegrated under the corrupt rule of popes. The second Rome in Constantinople, of course, had been sacked by the Muslims, by the Turks, and renamed Istanbul. So now the capital of Christianity in the minds of the Russians is now going to move north to Moscow, of all places. Let's just cross the Baltic to Sweden and make a few remarks here. In Sweden, society was not polarized into a landlord class and an enserfed peasantry, as it was in Turkey, Poland, and Russia. There were no serfs in Sweden. The peasants owned 50% of the arable land. The nobility were correspondingly less rich and privileged than in the great East European states. To be sure, Swedish nobles assumed political leadership, and they possessed large farms. They hired tenant laborers and exhibited the pride common to the nobility. But in style of life, the Swedish nobleman was not that distant from the peasants. From this comparatively undifferentiated, sort of homespun, God-fearing society, the great hero, Gustavus Adolphus, drew a powerful army of self-reliant soldiers, militant chaplains, and officers eager to invade and plunder Sweden's wealthier neighbors. And of course, we saw this when we talked earlier about the wars of religion and Sweden's intervention in those wars in Germany. Of course, Sweden does not have the natural resources of the population to transform itself into a lasting and great power, but it does achieve some preeminence here during the wars of religion. Now, Central Europe, I think we'll stop here since we've talked about sort of Eastern Europe, the Poland, Sweden, Russia. We're going to stop here, and in our next session, we'll talk about the rise of Austria and Prussia, right in the heart and center of Europe. Thank you.